I am Margaret Ellison. I am 67 years old, a widow, and I still run a modest real estate company in a quiet town in Ohio. People sometimes expect women my age to have already stepped aside to fade into the background of their children's lives, but I never saw myself that way. I have worked hard, built a business from scratch, and raised a daughter who once thought I hung the moon. Last Thanksgiving comes back to me like a warm painting. The kitchen smelled of turkey and sweet potatoes, and Emma sat at the table peeling apples while I showed her how thin I liked the slices for pie. Daniel, her husband, had football on in the living room. The grandchildren played with blocks on the carpet. I remember sitting back for a moment and thinking that life, despite its trials, had given me a treasure. The laughter, the clatter of plates, the hugs at the door when the night ended. It was one of those days you wish you could hold in your hands forever. This year is different. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. Daniel's number flashed on the screen. His voice was polite, but it carried no warmth. He said they were keeping Thanksgiving small this year. Just family. Maybe it would be better if I didn't come. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. I waited for Emma's voice to come on the line to soften the blow, but there was only silence after his words, and then the call ended. I sat there holding the phone like it had burned me. Just family. What was I then? Not family anymore. The sting went deeper than I expected. I'd lost my husband 5 years before, and I had worked so hard not to burden Emma with my loneliness. I showed up for birthdays, baked cakes, bought gifts, and kept my tears to myself. And now, in one short call, I was pushed out as if I were an outsider peering through the window of my own life. I tried to tell myself that Daniel must have his reasons. Maybe the house was too small, maybe they wanted privacy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was not a sudden decision. It was a quiet shutting out, a slow turning of the lock on a door I had once walked through freely. I saw it in the way Daniel spoke to me at dinners. His clipped tone, his sharp eyes when I offered advice. He thought of me as past my prime, a woman who had nothing left to contribute. In his mind, I was retired from relevance and worse in the way. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake remembering the times I'd opened my home to him when he was just dating Emma, when he was struggling to find work. I had believed in him. I had welcomed him like a son. Now he dismissed me as if I were an old neighbor who had overstayed her welcome. My chest ached with humiliation. I could almost hear him telling Emma that I was meddlesome, that I no longer understood how the world worked. The cruelty of it was not just in the exclusion, but in the belief that I had no value. Yet as I sat there staring at the ceiling in the dark, another thought began to grow. Daniel did not know everything. He might believe he held all the power, but there was one truth he had forgotten, or perhaps never understood. The house he and Emma lived in, the one he liked to show off as proof of his success, was not entirely his. The mortgage had been possible because of me. My name was on the loan. My resources had secured their future. The walls he now claimed as his castle stood because I had helped build the foundation. I pressed my hand to my chest and let out a long breath. The humiliation was still sharp, the hurt still raw, but beneath it was something stronger, something steadier. Daniel could try to erase me, but I was not so easily erased. I had more say in this family story than he wanted to believe. The twist of fate was that while he thought he could banish me from Thanksgiving, the truth was that I still held the keys to the very roof over his head, and that realization, painful as it was, gave me back a piece of myself that he had tried to take. The first signs were small, but once I noticed them, they were impossible to ignore. Daniel did not just tell me to stay away from Thanksgiving. He made sure Emma carried the weight of that decision. One evening, I stopped by their house with a pie, hoping to smooth things over. From the porch, I heard Emma's voice low and trembling as she begged him to reconsider. He cut her off, his tone sharp. He said she was weak for letting me interfere. I stood frozen in the shadows, listening to my daughter cry, her voice breaking in ways I had not heard since she was a child. Later that week, I visit again, pretending to drop off documents from my office. As I stepped into the hallway, I caught the sound of Daniel's voice through the slightly open door of his study. He was not just raising his voice, he was insisting. He wanted Emma to sign some property papers. She resisted, her voice soft but firm, asking why it was necessary. He told her not to question him. My stomach tightened. I knew control when I heard it, and the fear in her silence afterward told me more than words ever could. That night, long after the lights were out, I sat at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand. The house was quiet, but my heart was loud. I thought of my late husband, how he had always insisted that money leaves trails, and that lies about money rarely stay hidden. I scrolled to the number of an old friend who still worked at a bank. When she picked up, her voice hushed, as if she already sensed the nature of my call. I asked her in careful words to look at Daniel's financials tied to the mortgage I held. Her pause on the other end made my skin prickle. She spoke cautiously, careful not to say more than she was allowed. But what she did share was enough. Daniel had claimed a base salary far higher than what the documents now showed. He had listed income from investments that simply did not appear in the records. My friend did not spell it out, but the meaning was clear. He had stretched the truth, perhaps even lied outright. I hung up the phone and sat in the dim light, the refrigerator humming behind me. My worry for Emma shifted into something sharper, heavier. This was no longer just about a son-in-law who wanted me gone. This was about a man hiding cracks in his life, cracks he was desperate to plaster over with control and intimidation. I stared out at the dark yard beyond my window and made a quiet vow. If Daniel thought he could push me out while tightening his grip on Emma, he had underestimated me. He was building his life on lies, and lies always leave a trail. I intended to follow it. The knock came just after dinner, sharp and deliberate. I opened the door to find a young officer standing in the cold night air, notepad in hand, his expression polite but guarded. He asked if I was Margaret Ellison. When I nodded, he explained that a report had been filed alleging possible elder abuse. For a moment, the words made no sense. Then the truth hit me like ice. Daniel. He asked if he could step inside. My instinct told me this was no ordinary visit. I guided him to the foyer, the warm glow of my chandelier spilling across his uniform. He explained that the concern was that my daughter Emma might be financially exploiting me, pressuring me to change property ownership under duress. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat but kept it down. Instead, I steadied my voice, calm and measured, like I was testifying in court. I told him I was 67, in good health, still running my real estate business and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. He shifted in his seat as I handed him documentation of my recent physical exam proof of ownership of my company and bank statements showing I was financially secure. I even showed him the mortgage records that proved it was me, not Emma, who held power over Daniel's house. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. The officer's pen slowed across the page. His questions grew softer, less certain. He asked if Emma lived with me, and I explained that she was staying temporarily while separating from a controlling husband. I could see the unease in his eyes as he put the pieces together. What he had walked into was not a case of a daughter taking advantage of her mother. It was the opposite. It was a case of a desperate man twisting the system to strike back. I leaned forward, my tone firm, but not raised, and told him that I was not a victim. I told him that Emma had been the one enduring manipulation and intimidation. I asked him to record in his report that the accusation was false and appeared to be an act of harassment. He hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod, his jaw tight with discomfort at the obvious misuse of his time. When he finally rose to leave, he thanked me for my cooperation. I watched him step back into the night, his breath a cloud in the chill air. As the door shut behind him, I let myself breathe anger tightening into resolve. Daniel had crossed another line, reaching into the law itself to try and tear us down. Yet all it revealed was how fragile his position had become. He was not acting from strength anymore. He was acting from desperation. And desperation, I knew, always leaves mistakes in its wake. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on the earth and made the air thick. I had planned to spend it quietly cooking a small meal with Emma and pretending the season still held joy. But before I could even put the turkey in the oven, Emma called, her voice tight, her breath unsteady. She told me an emergency board meeting had been called at her nonprofit. Someone had sent documents accusing her of stealing funds, claiming the money had been funneled into accounts tied to me. I drove to the office building with my heart pounding. The streets were empty, lined with bare trees and quiet houses, but inside me was a storm. When I arrived, Emma sat outside in her car, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. She tried to smile, but her eyes were wide with fear. I told her we would face it together, then pushed open the doors of the nonprofit. The board sat around a long conference table, papers spread across its surface. The room smelled faintly of coffee and panic. At the head sat Eleanor Bishop, the chair, her face drawn but steady. She explained the anonymous package delivered that morning. Inside were forged bank statements, fabricated emails, and a letter suggesting Emma had siphoned funds from the organization. Every eye in the room shifted to my daughter, who sat trembling but upright, her chin lifted with defiance. I asked to examine the documents. My years in real estate had taught me how to read financial records, and the flaws revealed themselves quickly. The fonts did not match, the formatting was sloppy, the numbers inconsistent. I told the board the truth. These were forgeries. I'd never held accounts with Emma's nonprofit. I'd never received $1 from it. The silence in the room grew thick, broken only by the sound of a pen tapping nervously against the table. Eleanor asked if I had proof. I reached into my bag and placed real bank statements on the table, each one verified, each one clean. I had anticipated Daniel's desperation and called my contacts at the banks that morning. They had sent certified records showing no such accounts existed, no suspicious transfers, nothing but honesty in Emma's financial stewardship. Relief flickered in some of the board members' faces, but suspicions still lingered in others. Then the door opened. Daniel stepped inside his suit, immaculate, his hair perfectly in place, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted around the room, restless, defensive. He claimed he had come to support his wife, but his words dripped with false concern. He spoke of how much he cared for the organization, how he feared Emma might be under too much stress. It was a performance one I had seen before, in men who wrapped themselves in charm to hide the rot beneath. I stood, my voice steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. I told the board that Daniel had misrepresented his finances on the mortgage he had taken with Emma, that an internal review at his firm was already underway, that his accusations were nothing more than a desperate attempt to smear Emma and distract from his own unraveling career. The weight of my words hung in the air, undeniable. For a moment he tried to laugh it off. He said I had always disliked him, that I wanted to turn Emma against him. But then something cracked. His voice rose. His mask slipped. He shouted that no one respected him, that he had given everything, and still felt like an outsider. He said Emma admired her dead father more than she ever admired him. He said I treated him like he was never enough. The room went still. For the first time, his anger did not look like power. It looked like pain. His face twisted with something raw, almost childlike. He admitted he had doctored the documents not because he wanted to hurt Emma, but because he wanted the world to see him as strong, successful, worthy. He said he was tired of feeling like a failure. I felt a strange ache in my chest as I watched him unravel. This was the man who had humiliated me, threatened Emma, and tried to destroy her career. Yet beneath the cruelty was a wound I had not seen before, a wound he carried like a hidden scar. He was a man terrified of insignificance, clawing at power because he feared disappearing without it. The board members shifted uncomfortably, pity and anger mingling in their eyes. Eleanor finally spoke her tone, firm but compassionate. She said Emma had their confidence that the nonprofit would launch a formal audit to confirm her innocence, and that Daniel's outburst had only revealed his desperation. She asked him to leave. For once, he did not resist. He looked around the room as if searching for someone to defend him, then lowered his head and walked out. Emma's shoulders shook as the tension drained from her. I squeezed her hand steady and warm. The board thanked me for providing clarity, and I thanked them for their faith in my daughter. As we stepped outside, the sky had broken open, the gray giving way to a pale light. It felt like the end of a storm, the air sharp and clean. That evening, back at my house, Emma and I set the table for two. We ate turkey and stuffing in quiet, no laughter from a crowded room, no chaos of children running underfoot. Yet there was peace. We toasted with wine, our glasses catching the light, and for the first time in weeks, Emma's smile reached her eyes. I thought of Daniel alone in his house, built on lies, and felt no triumph. Only a deep, tired sadness. He had wanted respect, but he had gone about it in the worst way. Perhaps in another life, he might have found it honestly. But in this one, his choices had left only wreckage. And still, despite everything, I found myself hoping he would one day face his fear and heal. When the papers were signed, it was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Daniel did not contest the divorce. He simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of what he had built on lies. Emma did not celebrate, but she did not mourn either. She said it felt like closing the door to a house she no longer lived in. I knew then she was ready to reclaim her life. We began slowly. The house that had once been filled with Daniel's heavy presence became our project. On a Saturday morning, we carried his old leather chairs to the curb. By the afternoon, the walls were painted in colors that reflected Emma's spirit. The living room bloomed in soft creams and blues. Her bedroom became a sanctuary, calm and light. For the first time in years, she walked barefoot through those rooms without fear. I remember the evening she made her first meal in that kitchen alone. Pasta simmered on the stove. The air was filled with garlic and laughter. She leaned against the counter, a glass of wine in her hand, and told me she felt at home for the first time since her wedding. That house had not changed, but its soul had. It belonged to her again. Seasons shifted, and life found its rhythm. Emma returned to her work with renewed energy. The nonprofit not only survived, but thrived, bolstered by the board's trust in her. I watched her speak at fundraisers with strength in her voice and clarity in her eyes. She had once doubted her own judgment. Now she stood tall, her scars visible, but no longer defining her. By the time autumn returned, the leaves turned gold and crimson, and a full year had passed since the Thanksgiving, when I had been told I was not welcome. Emma called one evening and asked if she could host Thanksgiving this year. She wanted to open her home, the home she had reclaimed, and fill it with family and friends. My chest tightened with pride as I told her I could not imagine a better place to be. That morning, the house glowed with warmth. The scent of roasted turkey drifted from the oven. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Olivia, Emma's oldest friend, arrived with her children, and their footsteps pattered across the wooden floors. Marcus and his wife came with pies, their voices carrying, as they told stories from years past. For the first time, Emma's dining room was crowded, alive, and joyful. I brought my contribution, the cranberry relish my mother had once made, a dish that had graced every family Thanksgiving I could remember. Emma placed it in a crystal bowl at the center of the table and said it felt like we were honoring generations before us. As we bowed our heads before the meal, I looked around the table. Faces shone with light, not the perfection of untouched lives, but the beauty of people who had endured and grown stronger together. At some point in the evening, as plates were cleared and coffee poured, Emma leaned close and whispered that she felt free. She said she no longer carried the weight of his voice in her head. She said she finally understood that family is not where you are invited, but where you are cherished. My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. Later, as I sat by the fire watching the children play with board games on the rug, I thought about the year we had walked through. Rejection, humiliation, false accusations, and fear had all tried to take root in our lives. Yet here we were, healed, laughing stronger than before. Daniel had tried to break us apart, but instead, he had revealed the strength of our bond. That night before I left, Emma handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a brass key holder, engraved with simple words, "This is your home too." I touched the letters with my fingers and felt the warmth behind them. She had not only rebuilt her house, she had built a tradition, a safe place where love could always return. As I drove home beneath the crisp November stars, I felt a peace I had not known in years. Life does not always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes it shatters before it heals. But if we hold fast to love, if we fight for what is right, the pieces can come together into something even stronger. That was the lesson of our Thanksgiving. Family is not about blood or invitations. It is about belonging, about choosing to stand with one another through the storm. And that night, I knew Emma and I had chosen well.